Have you ever wondered how Attack on Titan might have changed if Eren's mother was never eaten by a Titan? In this video, we're going to have a discussion about the 3 different ways that I think it might have gone, because Carla's death had a major impact on the series, especially when it comes to Eren's mentality and giving him the fuel he needed to do the rumbling, and a bunch of other things. If she hadn't died, then it's obvious his life would have gone in a completely different direction. And yeah, like I said, there are 3 realistic ways that I see it going. And so yeah, we're just going to be going through them one by one. And in the comments, you can let me know which one you think is most realistic. Alright, so the first question we need to ask ourselves is, if Eren's mother is going to survive, how exactly would it happen? And when I was thinking about this idea, I realized that there was an opportunity for Harness to save her life. In episode 1, there was a moment when Harness showed up and basically promised to save everyone, and he ran towards the Smiling Titan almost like he was going to do something, and then in the end, as we know, he kind of like just turned around, grabbed the kids and ran away. Now, if we imagine that somewhere in the Attack on Titan multiverse, there's a reality where he, gathers up the courage and just goes in, slashes the Smiling Titan, and by him doing this, first of all, it will have big ramifications down the road, because if Dinah Fritz isn't alive, then her and Eren will never have that moment where he activates the Founder. But even if we just put that to the side for a second, the main benefit in this moment in time is that they'd be able to free Carla from the rubble, they'd have enough time, and then they take her to the boats that were heading to Wall Rose. After that, they join the other refugees who were heading in the same direction, and at the same time, Grisha would have killed the royal family and he'd be heading back to meet them. So we get this same moment in the anime, only this time around, Carla is alive and things would have to play out a bit differently. We have to remember that possibly one of the biggest questions of the anime is why Grisha still gave Eren his Titan even though he saw the future and didn't want Eren to do the rumbling. Personally, my opinion on this is that the reason he still did it was that when he found out Carla died, all he cared about was the fact that his wife was dead at the hands of Marley, and he said to Eren, like, you can get revenge for us, like, you can get revenge for your mother. Her death played a large part in the reason why Grisha gave Eren his Titan in that moment. And so I think that if he came back and his family was still alive, would Grisha really take Eren to the woods and give him a Titan, shortening his lifespan to 13 years and all the things that come with it? We also have to factor in the fact that Grisha had been on the island for 13 years, and throughout that whole time he'd always prioritized his family over the mission. He cared about them more than he cared about being an Eldian restorationist. So would Grisha really take Eren to the woods and give him a Titan? It is a little bit difficult to imagine that. And so for this first prediction, I'm saying that there is a timeline in which Grisha prioritizes his family and he chooses not to give Eren the founding Titan. In this timeline, I think he'd literally just spend the remaining days or weeks that he has left with his family, and then eventually when he dies, he kind of just leaves it to fate. Like, he's leaving the whole future of the island purely down to chance. And I guess you could say that's not a smart thing to do, and it's definitely not. But if Carla's alive, and Eren's alive, and Mikasa's alive, and they've survived this attack, Grisha giving Eren this Titan is inevitably going to tear the family apart, especially because he'd have to disappear out of nowhere, and he wouldn't really be able to say goodbye to anyone. Him disappearing, Eren getting a Titan, all those things, it would just be so much more complicated if Carla was around. And I think if she's alive, honestly, I can see a reality where he just doesn't do it, and he dies of what looks like natural causes, but is really the curse of Ymir. All that being said, we do need to explore the second option here, which is that Grisha does follow the same behavior that he did in the anime, and he gives Eren the key, passes down his Titan, and leaves without really telling anyone, what's going on. In a timeline like this, things would progress mostly the same up until the point where Eren becomes old enough to join the military. Before the wall was broken down, Carla was adamant. She was like 100% certain that she would never let Eren join the scouts because, like everyone else, she saw that whenever the scouts came back home, they were always defeated, people were always dead, and she didn't want that for him. She didn't want him to get eaten. Now that was before the walls were broken down, so after the walls are broken, after seeing the Titans firsthand, actually witnessing how they eat people alive, I think there'd be a 0% chance that she'd ever allow him to join. It would be even less than when the series began. And so I genuinely think that she wouldn't allow him to join the military. Now, you might say that Eren would just ignore her and join the scouts regardless, and while that is a possibility, we can't ignore the fact that the leader of the cadets is Keith Shardis. Keith is someone who's had a crush on Carla for over a decade, and even in the main series when Carla was dead, Keith tried to sabotage Eren from joining the cadets for his own safety. Like, he wanted to protect Eren to protect Carla's memory. So if we imagine for a second that she's alive and she actually has a word with him and speaks to him about this, I think Keith would be even more aggressive in his tactics to stop Eren from joining. This could range from sabotaging his equipment to making his life hell. He could just do all sorts of things to make Eren's life as difficult as possible. And again, you could say, oh, well, Eren would persevere. He would, keep going. But Keith has all the power in the situation. He could do, I'm sure there's so many more things he could have done that we didn't see that could have affected Eren's experience in the cadets. For argument's sake, let's just say he tampers with the equipment, and this time around he doesn't change his mind, and he allows Eren to fail the test, meaning he never fully joins the cadets. As a result, Eren would be sent back home, and likely Mikasa would go along with him, which by itself is a huge blow to humanity because they lose their second strongest soldier. Then, when the battle in Tross comes around, you don't have Mikasa, you don't have Eren turning into a Titan, so that in itself creates a few problems. Number one, the Titan that was charging towards these people in this scene, no one would have stopped it in that case, and all these people, including Louise, they all would have died. The second thing is that without Eren turning into a Titan, it means that Reiner, Annie, and Bertolt would have gone even further than they did. Remember, their original plan was for Bertolt to kick in the gate, and they were going to see if the Founding Titan would reveal itself, and if it didn't, they'd cause even more carnage, as Reiner was going to knock in the inner gate of Wall Rose, and Titans and people just go flooding through. This would create a humanitarian crisis in which the entire population of Paradise Island would be condensed into Wall Cena, which, as we all know, is the smallest wall out of the three. With the amount of people there are compared to the amount of food inside Wall Cena, is just impossible. Like, there would have been a full-on civil war between the people, the army, and the royals. There's no way that it would have ended nicely. It would have definitely been a full-out, all-scale civil war caused by Reiner. Assuming that Eren doesn't turn into a Titan during the Civil War, I think the most likely outcome is that the warriors head back to Mali. And based on everything they've learned, from their perspective, they thought the king would appear and defend the country from an attack from outside invaders. But the fact remains that, on the occasions where they've attacked, no one showed up to defend the island. So, if I was them, I would just assume that the king for some reason isn't able to use his power. Now, the way Mali chooses to respond to that information, that's probably the most unpredictable part, because, in theory, they could then take that information and then go and blitz the island and just kill everyone, or they'd maybe say that they're putting the plan on hold for a while, until they can work out whether the king does or doesn't have the Founding Titan. In this scenario, it would purely be down to someone like Magath or the General to work out whether it's worth invading Paradise for a second time, or if they're just going to leave it and focus their attention somewhere else. Finally, the third alternate reality where Carla survives, this one is my personal favourite, and it's the one where Grisha passes on his Titan to Eren, but in this case he actually tells Eren and he tells Carla the truth about his backstory. In episode 1, we got the hint that Grisha was finally getting ready to tell Eren the truth about his past, but in the end for some reason he didn't say anything, and he preferred for Eren to, take the key and go and find out the information for himself. However, with Carla being alive, it creates the possibility that he might actually just tell them everything. And the reason I say that is because if he doesn't say anything and he just disappears, he knows that's going to hurt his wife a lot, Like, if he just gives the time to Eren, doesn't say anything, he's going to be a missing person and Carla's going to have no idea what happened to him. So I think as a husband, this would be the most reasonable thing he could do if he was going to give Eren the Founding Titan. Additionally, if Carla finds out the truth about the outside world and all the people who want to kill them, it might cause a little bit of a change in her mindset. In my opinion, I think number one, she wouldn't want Grisha to pass his Titan down to anyone because obviously that means her husband is about to get eaten, but if he's insistent on doing it, then I think she suggests someone like Keith should be the next founder. Keith is someone that she's known for a long time, and let's face it, she'd rather that he dies from the curse of Ymir rather than her 10-year-old son. Now, if Grisha was to keep insisting that it had to be Eren, and let's just assume that he does go ahead and gives his son the Founding Titan, that would lead to a whole new scenario, because if we can imagine this for a second, if Eren knew from the very beginning that anyone he meets could be a Titan from Mali, and he knew about the outside world from the start, that creates an entirely different series. It would be a series in which he knows he can't trust anyone, so number one, I'd imagine he'd make a lot less friends, and number two, he'd be more skeptical of everyone he meets. In the main anime, I say that Eren was quite a trusting person. Like, whenever Annie or Reiner or Bertolt, whenever they were spoken about as potentially being traitors, he was always the one to say, nah guys, it can't be them, whereas everyone else was a bit more like, it might be them, it might be. So I think in this new scenario, Eren would be a lot more skeptical, he'd be a lot more willing to believe that people are working for the enemy. When it comes to the attack on Tross, this time when the Colossal Titan appears, Eren would immediately know that this is someone he potentially knows. He'd know that it's a person, and so after the Colossal disappears, Eren would likely chase after Bertolt. Whether he's successful or not is a different question, because if I remember correctly, I think Bertolt did rank ahead of Eren in the cadet rankings, which is to be expected because they already had military training before they even joined the cadets. So yeah, I think Bertolt would be skillful enough to get away. Eventually, the chaos in Tross would get to the point where Eren has to decide whether he's willing to reveal his Titan and, expose himself in order to save the people who were in the city. Ultimately, I do think things would get bad enough for him to do this, because if he doesn't turn into a Titan, then who's gonna plug the hole in the wall? Like, someone still needs to do that. And of course, that would lead to a similar series of events as in the main series, in which Reiner, Annie, and Bertolt pause their attack because they finally found a Titan shifter from the island. Following that, Eren would get arrested and put on trial just like you'd expect, only this time around the military would take Carla hostage as well. We have to remember that the people of the island don't know anything about Titan shifters, so from their perspective, if Eren can turn into a Titan, then there's a good possibility in their minds that Carla can turn into one as well. For that reason, Carla would be locked in an underground cell, or she'd be put on trial with Eren at the same time, and together they'd both be grilled by the military about their knowledge of Titans and their motivations. Of course, they wouldn't just say everything that Grisha told them, because that could cause a whole bunch of problems in itself. But what I would think is that Eren would suggest that they go to Shiganshina, where they can find proof about the Titans in Grisha's basement. Assuming that Erwin would want to go along with this, from this point onwards I think things would play out mostly the same, with the big difference coming in Season 2 with the Dinah Fritz moment. As we've established, in this alternate timeline, Dinah Fritz was killed in Shiganshina by Harness, so when we come around to the Season 2 finale, Eren is basically f***ed. There was a moment in the finale where Reiner just began chucking Titans at everyone, and of course Eren was injured so he couldn't transform. If it wasn't for him luckily awakening his powers in this moment, I think we can all agree, everyone would have died. Mikasa was injured, so she wasn't in good shape. Erwin had lost an arm. Armin and John, they were knocked off their horse. I mean, same for Eren as well. Like, he was knocked off his horse, he couldn't transform. So everyone was screwed, like they weren't in a good situation. The reason I like this though is because a few years ago I remember seeing a quote from Isayama where he said that he planned to end Attack on Titan like the movie The Mist, and although I haven't seen that movie, the ending is super iconic because it's basically where the main character, he had to kill everyone he loves because there wasn't any way to escape the monsters. An ending like that is something that Isayama originally planned to do, and I think in this alternate timeline, this is the scenario where that missed ending would happen. Literally all of Eren's closest friends would be killed and eaten by Titans right in front of him, as he'd be unable to transform, and with no Dinah Fritz, he wouldn't be able to activate the coordinate. The timeline could then end with Eren himself being eaten, and once that's done, whoever ate Eren would just be a confused random person, and Reiner and Bertolt would be able to take them and bring them back to Marley. What follows this would be Marley invading Paradise and stealing their natural resources while subjugating and wiping out the local population. Honestly, if this had happened, it would have been the saddest possible ending of Attack on Titan, and I guess it's one of the many reasons why Carla had to die. That is just my opinion though, so let me know in the comments down below what you think, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this. I'd appreciate it if you dropped a like as well, as it does help out the channel, and until the next one, peace out.